In this section, we're going to be going through modeling. First, we will start with the unit setup. If you open 3D Max, you can see the grid in here, which will represent our units. In my case, this by default, the grid is equal to 10 units. If you go in here, each grid is going to be 10 units by 10 units. If you don't care about the units, then it's fine. You can work with that. But if you want more specific units, we will have to change this grid equal to 10 or 1 or any number with a unit in here. So I'm going to go customize unit setup, and we're going to access our unit setup. By default, it's called generic units. So it's generic units, which is just like 1 or 10 or 15 or whatever. But if you want more accurate measurements and units, so you can choose between a metric unit or a US standard. If you're working, in my case, I work on a metric unit system, so you have to choose which metric system you want. Or if you want to go to US standards, definitely you can work with any of those. For example, feet or feet with decimal inches or fractional inches or whatever. So you can choose whatever you want if you want to work with feet or you want to work with inches and what is the ratio of that. So in my case, I work with metric units and I'm going to choose centimeters. Then we're going to go to the system unit setup, and then we have to make sure that every unit equal 1 centimeters. This unit should be the same as this. If you're working with inches, so then you have to choose inches. If you're working with feet, you choose feet. If you're working with meters, you choose meters. So in my case, I'm working with centimeters, so I'm going to choose centimeters. And you can see in here, when I say okay, my grid equal to 10 centimeters now. So I'm working with an exact unit system. So I'm going to go customize unit setup again, system unit, and now I'm going to change this value. If you want this grid not to be 10, maybe 100 or 1 or whatever, you have to multiply this number by 10 or divide by 10. If you divide this by 10, it's going to be 0.1. This number will be divided by 10. Now it's 1. The grid equal to 1. So each grid is 1 by 1 centimeters, which is very small. If you want it to be a bigger scale, you can multiply the number 1 by 10. It's going to be 10. Now it's going to be the grid equal to 100 centimeter, which is 1 meter, which is the grid is going to be a bit big. So it depends what are you going to be working on and what's the project is going to be. So in my case, I'm just going to keep it as 1, and it's fine. Grid equal to 10 centimeters. That's great. This is the first step. Second, I'm going to just create a box. And now I'm just going to create this box and I'm going to go to the Modify tab. Remember, if anything we need to create, whatever we created, we need to modify it. We have to go to the Modify tab to modify it. And now you can access the parameter of this box. I have its length, and now you can see its centimeters. So I can put an exact number, for example, 40 centimeters in length, 40 centimeters in width, and maybe 10 centimeters in height. And that's it. This is our values for the exact values for the length, width, and height. If I'm going to draw another thing, let's say, for example, a cylinder, and then go to the Modify tab, you will see the same thing, but different parameters. So now we have parameter for the radius, parameter for the height. So let's say I'm going to have 4 centimeter radius, which means 8 centimeters diameter. And I want, let's say, 60 centimeters in height. And this is what I get. Now, if you go in here, you can see we have more options. We have something called segments. We have segments in here, but we have something different, let's say sides. Sides is basically how many sides this circle does have. So if you can see 3 sides, which is going to be like a triangle, 4 sides, which is going to be square, and so on. So 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. The more sides it has, the more smooth this circle is going to be. Okay. Now you can also slice this cylinder from and to. So you can slice it from a value to a value, and you can do whatever you want. If you don't want an exact full cylinder, you can just slice it on and maybe have a part of the cylinder, let's say something like that. This is applicable depending on each object we're going to draw. If you go to something else, for example, maybe a cone, so you can go to the Modify tab, and then you can access the radius, the base radius, radius 1, and then the top radius, which is going to be radius 2, and then the height of it, and then we can have the sides of it, how many sides we need, and then we can slice it on also. So I can slice it and have a full cone. Now I'm just skipping the segments because I'm going to go through this just in a few minutes. If I'm going to draw another option, let's say maybe a torus, and then I want to modify this object, so I'm going to go to the Modify tab. This is the first radius, this is the inner radius, and then this is the rotation. As you can see, it's going to be rotated on itself. And this is the segments. We're going to talk to it later on. And then the sides, if I want it to be 4-sided or more. And definitely you can see I can slice it in here also from this side and from this side. So if I don't want it the full torus, then this is what I want. Now, each one of those objects, I'm going to do it with the box to make it clear. Each box or each object we're going to create, it has something called segments. What does segments mean? By default, if I'm going to put segments on and I change the value of segments, let's say I'm going to make it 5 by 5 by 5, I'm not going to see anything. But if I'm going to go to the 4 view, you can see this box, it has more segments, but I cannot see them in here. So if I change the segments in the left, the width and the height, the length, width and height, you can see things are changing in the top, left, and front views, but not seen here. So what's happening is basically I'm dividing this box into slices, into segments. They are called segments. To see them in here, we have to change the view. So now we're going to talk about the views in here and all the views. By default, you can see that the top, front, left, they have something called wireframe. That's why we are seeing the wires of these objects and not the full object. In here, we have something called default shading. So that's why we are seeing the shaded version of this box. I can change this default shading into a wireframe. And I can change this wireframe into a default shaded. So I can do this for every one of those. Change it to wireframe or to default shade. I can definitely change it to something else. For example, bounding box or facets or hidden lines, or any other, let's say clay, we have something called model asset, we have stylized object, let's say graphite, color pencil, this is graphite, we have pastel, and so on. We have a lot of options, but mostly we're going to use default shading and wireframe. Because it's very important to change between default shaded and wireframe, it has a shortcut. The shortcut is F3. If you press F3, the keyboard, you're changing from wireframe to shaded. So F3, 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 and this is back normal. So you don't want to go on in here and go to wireframe. You just press F3 on your keyboard and just make sure your F3 is not a shortcut, depend on your keyboard you have. So maybe you have to press function F3, depends on what you're working on keyboard. So F3, wireframe, F3, shaded view. Now, second thing which is important, sometimes it's good to work with modeling and I want to model and I want to see the edges while working in shaded view. So now I have to go, instead of wireframe, I'm going to go to something called edged faces. So I'm going to go in here on the shaded or default shading, I'm going to go to edged faces. So now you can see the wireframe on the shaded. So we can see both. Not either the wireframe or the shaded, we're going to see edge faces. The shortcut for that is F4. So F3 to move from shaded to wireframe, and F4 it just works when it has default shading. So F4 we see the wireframe unshaded. When working with modeling, we always have to have our edge faces on so we can see the details of this object and the segments, because we're going to start manipulating these edges and vertices we're going to talk about in the next lecture. So now I've just created a box and I've worked with these segments. So now I can just create the cylinders now, and you can see the segments in here. So I can add more height segments or or cap segments, which are on the cap. And we're going to go for those. We're going to understand these, what does they mean, or why do we add them in terms of modeling. So we're going to talk in the next lecture. So I just created any object, work with that on the parameters. So you can change the length, the width segments, and the height segments as much as I want. Great. So segments, usually when we add segments, it will add smoothness to the object. For example, I'm going to just get sphere in my case. Because it's curved, you can see between one point and another, there's a straight line. So if I add more segments to that, you can see the sphere is going to become more smooth. If I'm going to add off the segments and make them low segments, it's going to become a bit more low res. Okay, so the segments, it will add value. Definitely on a box, because it's straight, it doesn't really differ if I add segments or not, because it's straight lines. Great. Now, I'm just gonna start adding some objects, for example, a box. Maybe I'm gonna add a cylinder. I'm gonna add also maybe another box in here, tall box. I'm gonna add a plane. I'm gonna add a sphere. Okay, great. Now, first of all, if I go to modify, okay, to the modify tab, you can access the parameter of each of the selected objects. For example, I'm gonna select the sphere. I'm gonna add more segments to it to become more smooth. I can also access some options that we didn't go through them. For example, in the sphere, I have something called a hemisphere. So I can cut the sphere other than the slice. I'm going to slice it on, like the cylinder and like the cone. In this case, I'm going to just leave it as a normal sphere. Now, the second thing I'm going to talk about other than the parameters is modifier list. As you can see, the modifier list is empty if I have nothing selected. But now I'm going to select this box or the cylinder or the sphere. And now you can see I have access to a long list of modifiers. What are modifiers? Modifiers are just a script that would help this object to get manipulated in a specific way. For example, I'm just going to work on these several objects and I'm going to add different modifiers on each one to get to know how they work and why we use them. I'm going to start with the cylinder. I'm just going to go to the Modify tab. I'm going to search for something called bend. Okay, you can just search for it, or you can press BE or BEND or B, and you can search for that. So you can see I have bend. And as you know, bend is basically I want this cylinder to bend. Okay, so I'm going to do a bending on this cylinder. So you have a bend modifier over here, over the cylinder, so I have a stack. Now I can hide this bend effect and turn it on back, or I can delete this bend from the modifier. Or I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to undo, or I can press undo from here, or definitely I can go edit and then I. So I'm just going to go through the basics of how to work with modifiers, and then that's going to be applicable on all the others I'm going to use. So I just work on bend. I just added the bend modifier. I can turn it off and turn it on, and I can delete it off if I don't want it. Inside the parameters, you can see I have different parameters. These parameters are for the bend because it's selected. If I go to cylinder, now these are the parameters of the cylinder, so I can add different or move, make maybe have it thinner, radius, maybe taller, and then go back to bend. Great. Now, the bend modifier, it has several modifiers. I'm going to go through the basics. So I'm going to change the angle of the bend. So let's say I want to have it 90 degrees bend. Now, you can see this orange gizmo or manipulator, which is for the bend. And you can see it's rotated or bended 90 degrees. Perfect. But what about the cylinder? The cylinder is going straight. The cylinder is going straight for one simple reason. It doesn't have segments. So it's straight. The lines are straight. So what I want to do, if I want to have it to curve, I need to add more smoothness to it. So I'm going to add something called, in this case, height segments. So height segments, they're going to be on the height of the cylinder to make this bend. As you can see, I've just turned off the visibility. So I'm moving the effect of the bend on it and turn it on. How to add segments to this cylinder? So I have to go back to the cylinder modifier and go to the parameters in here. And now I can access the height segments. So I'm going to add 2 segments. So you can see 1, 2. If I want more, 3, for example, 1, 2, 3. And if I want more and more, so this is, we're going to make this cylinder go smoother and smoother and smoother and smoother. The maximum height segments is 200. So I'm going to add the maximum, and then I'm going to access the bend tool. And now I can go bend maybe more and more and more. And I can go to the other side. And definitely these options we can animate later on. So I can go access the bend angle, and I can access the direction of the bend. And definitely I can change the bend axis. In my case, it's the Z axis because the cylinder was standing straight. Now, if I want to make it bend on a Y axis, you would see I'm going to have something a bit different. So I'm bending on the Y axis if I want to have this kind of bending. And I can bend on this X axis if I want to have this kind of bending, depending on the axis we're working on. In my case, this is the Z axis, so I'm just going to be working on the Z axis. Now, if I'm going to go down, I have something called limits. So I can limit this angle, the bend of this cylinder, with have it more specific. In my case, it's bending from here until here. So I'm going to add the limit effect. As you can see, things have changed. And I have something called the upper limit. Okay, so maybe I wanted to bend from here to here and then go straight. And I have the lower limit if I don't want it to start bending from the start. So I wanted to start bending maybe something like that. And then maybe this kind of bend I want. Okay, as you can see, just playing around with the bend. Maybe I want it to be bended this way, or maybe more, or maybe less, and so on. So I can play with the limits, where it's going to start the bend and where it's going to end the bend, and then it's going to go straight, and in here definitely it's going to be going straight. Great. So this is basically more details about the modifiers. I'm going to do several modifiers, but I'm going to go through them a bit quicker because it's going to be the same concept. So I'm going to go to this box. I'm going to add a new modifier called twist. This is another modifier, which is twist. I'm going to twist this box. So I'm going to access the parameter of the twist, and I can twist this box. As you can see, I'm twisting it. So I'm going to twist it 360 degrees. As you can see, the orange gizmo shows that this object is twisted. The box is not. Why is that? Because simply what's happening, the object got crossed each other and then got back to its place. So the problem is that I don't have segments to make this twist. So I'm going to go to the box. I'm going to add to the height segments more segments. So I'm going to add more segments. And as you can see, I have a good quality twist. Now I go back to twist, and I can twist it more or twist it less. Make the twist on a different axis. Change the limits of the twist. Maybe I wanted to twist from here and from here. So I want the twist to be something like that. Let's say starting from 20 centimeters and ending on the 60 centimeters, or maybe less, maybe 50. Okay, so this is the twist, maybe less also, 40. Okay, so I just want to make the twist in here. So I'm going to make something like that. So it's going to be straight from up, straight from down, and the twist is in the middle. Okay, so definitely we can work it, have it more perfect, just working with the exact numbers we're going to be working with. Great. Now I'm going to add another effect on this box. So I'm going to access something called taper. So I'm going to taper this box. Amount of the tapering is basically scaling it from up or scaling it up or down. Okay. And then the second option is basically curving it inward or outward. Definitely this is nothing happening in here. So there's nothing happening. So I'm going to go to the box. I'm going to add height segments. Now you can see I'm just curving it out and curving it in. Okay, and then scaling it in or scaling it out. So I can do something like that maybe. Okay, so I can just play around with this. Now every time in here I'm adding segments, I'm adding 200 segments. And later on we will not use this much. I'm just making it so you can see the smoothness of the curves and the effects. Great. Now I'm gonna go to the sphere. In the sphere, I'm just gonna add another effect, which is called FFD. In our case, you can see I have many options for FFD. I have FFD 2x2x2, 3x3x3, 4x4x4, or FFD box or FFD cylinder. They are technically very similar to each other. Now, the FFD 2x2x2 is basically, what's an FFD? It's basically a cage that's going to surround the object selected. And then it's going to be divided into 2x2x2 segments, or 3x3x3, or 4x4x4. As for the FFD box and cylinder, it's going to be an FFD, which is a cage, box cage, okay? But you can insert the number you want. Maybe, for example, I want FFD 2x3x4. So I have to access an FFD box and I import my numbers. As for the cylinder, it's similar to the box, but it comes in a cylindrical shape. So I'm gonna just access, for example, FFD 3x3x3. As you can see, I have this orange cage, which is the gizmo, and it's separated by 3 segments, the height, the width, and in the depth. Okay, so now if I want to access those points in here, so I can manipulate this. So all I need to do is press on the word FFD 3x3x3. When you press on that, automatically it shows the first option, which is control points. You can do this by going here and choosing control points, or just click in here to turn it on and turn it off. So I'm just gonna press here to turn it on. Now I have access to all these points. What does that mean? Great. I'm just gonna select this point, for example, and I'm gonna move it up and down. So now this cage, I'm gonna move these, moving in, out. So now this object is more organic, so I can just move these vertices, so I can make them more organic object if I want to start squishing this. So I'm just gonna select these top 3, and I'm gonna go on the X, Z axis, and I'm gonna go through this, and I'm gonna have something like a chair or a seat. Okay, when I'm done, I have to turn off the FFD. So I press on FFD. Now I'm back to selection. I'm gonna go to the sphere and I'm gonna add more segments to have it more smooth. I'm gonna add segments, and as you can see, I have a simple seat. Or whatever I want, I can just manipulate this. So I can just go back to the FFD 3x3. For example, I'm gonna select these 3 points, or maybe I'm gonna scale them down. For example, something like that. So now you can see I have something different, or maybe hold the top area and move it up to have something tall in here. Maybe hold these points in here, 2 points, and move them in to have something different, or maybe out, or whatever, or maybe down. Or I can rotate them if I want. So I can rotate. So let's say I'm gonna hold all this and I'm gonna rotate it, something like this. Definitely you can see there's a bit of errors in here because the mesh is basically going through each other. So this is going to be a bit of a problem. So I'm done with that. I'm going to turn off FFD, and now I'm back to selection. I'm going to select this plane, and same thing. I'm going to add a new modifier, which is going to be noise. Noise is basically a modifier that will create some kind of chaos on the object. So let's insert a noise modifier in here. It's going to add a bit more segments on this plane. So I'm going to add maybe 40 by 40 to have more details. So I'm going to go to the noise modifier. Now, I have 2 things I have to worry about: the scale and the strength. I'm going to start with the strength, which is going to be the push. I'm going to push on the Z-axis. For example, I'm going to try to create a terrain. So on the Z-axis, I want the push to be, let's say, 20 centimeters. Okay. As you can see, the object is kind of pushed, but I cannot see much of this push because the scale is a bit big. So if I scale it down, then you can see the push and pull is going to be very close to each other, if this is what I want. And now the push strength is very big. I'm just going to make it down in my case. So, and then I can push this strength, scale a bit more. So now I have kind of a terrain. This terrain is good, is bad. I can just play around with it, make it maybe smoother, maybe strong push, maybe less. So let's say some kind of surface. I can definitely do this. For example, I can make it water, for example. I'm just going to do the scale much smaller. For example, maybe 1 or maybe less. And the push is going to be much smaller. So I'm going to make the scale 0.2 and the push something like that. So now I have some kind of water. But the thing is, the water is a bit pinchy. The segments are pinchy, so I have to add more segments. So I can just go to the plane and add more segment. But in my case, I'm just going to add another modifier, which is going to be our last modifier for now, which is called Turbosmooth. So I'm going to go Turbo. So it's smooth this object, and it will add more segments to it. And I have iteration in here, so I can press 2 iterations, 3 iterations. The more iteration, the more smooth it's going to be. And as you can see, now I have something smooth. Let's say I have water or maybe cloth or something, whatever I want to have, like some kind of chaos. I can just scale this a bit more to have more details, and I can make this push a bit less or maybe a bit more if I want to have it some bigger, and it's smooth at the same time. Great. Now we have used several modifiers. Each modifier has a specific characteristics. But at the same time, as you can see in here, I just added 2 modifiers, and I can add more and more and more. For example, I have this twisted object and I liked it. This is what I want. Let's make it a bit less, something like that. Okay, great. I did this twist. I can add another modifier, for example, bend. Now I can bend it. So now it's twisted and bended, let's say 180 degrees. So I have a bend and a twist. But at the same time, I have a bend in here, and now I'm going to twist it. So if you twist it, you can see it's going to be not the same. So it does matter what modifier starts and what modifiers is after, what's before and what's after. So in here I have the twist, so it twisted and then bended, while in here it's bended and then twisted. So you're not gonna get the same effect. So I can just select this and maybe twist it if I want. I'm not sure what I'm gonna get. I can just twist it, get something else. I can select this and twist it, or do whatever you want. There's a lot of modifiers. I didn't go through them all, but you can just try and go through them, and this is what I got. Maybe after the twist, I'm gonna add a bend to it. So now I'm gonna bend it, something like that. And you can see I can get more complex shapes using this kind of stuff. Maybe after that, I can add an FFD, 4x4x4, more details. Click on the FFD, I'm going to select this and maybe move it up, or this I'm going to move it up, and maybe this I'm going to rotate it in this way. So I'm just adding more chaos. So this is definitely, I'm just ruining this object, but I can do more than one modifier over each other and work on that. So maybe I have this object done, I liked it, and maybe I can just add more details to it if I need. So I can add a turbo smooth at the end of that to smooth it out. As you can see, it is smooth now. In my case, I just lost a bit more details on the twist tool. If this is what I want, then that's great. So now I have this kind of object. If I don't want the turbo smooth, I can show the effect before and after. If this is what I like, then great. If this is not what I like, I can just select the turbo smooth and delete. Okay. So this is the basics of modeling. How to start, first of all, if you need the units. Second, how to work with the Modify tab, with the parameter of the object. And if I add modifier list to modifiers to the object, how to work with the modifiers and how to work with the parameters of the modifier and stack more than one modifier over each other. In the next lecture, we're going to go through the basic of geometry and geometrical or polygonal modeling.